Chapter 1. The New Arrival. Alan Price liked the patterns of Bright Hollow. The town had a rhythm he could count on. Sunrise over pale rooftops, the faint chatter of neighbors, the dependable hum of the morning traffic. His work as a data analyst only sharpened his appreciation for the predictable. Nothing shocked him here, and that was how he preferred it. Then Draven moved in. Alan first noticed him one Thursday afternoon while hauling groceries from his trunk. A moving van sat in the driveway of the vacant house next door. Among the worn cardboard boxes and plain gray furniture stood a tall man, shoulders squared, posture steady, scanning the house as if he were memorizing every nail and corner. Alan tried not to stare, but something about the new neighbor drew his attention. Draven carried himself with a precision that felt unnatural. Each step measured, each movement almost too controlled. When Draven caught Alan watching, he nodded politely, a faint trace of a smile on his face. Alan stepped closer. "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Alan." "Draven," the man answered, his voice calm but with a subtle rasp Alan couldn't place. His handshake was surprisingly warm and firm. "What brings you to Bright Hollow?" Alan asked, trying to sound casual. Draven paused for a moment before replying, as though running through an answer in his head. "Work," he said finally. "Research." Alan waited for more details, but Draven volunteered nothing else. "Well," Alan continued, "if you need help settling in, let me know. These houses have some plumbing quirks." "I will," Draven replied. His gaze didn't waver, and Alan had to look away first, uneasy under that steady focus. Later that evening, Alan watched from his kitchen window as Draven unloaded the rest of his boxes. One crate, marked with no writing at all, seemed heavier than it had any right to be. Draven handled it as if its weight barely mattered. When the lid shifted, Alan saw faint blue light leaking through the seams before Draven pushed it shut. Alan felt a chill. Maybe it was just specialized lab gear. Maybe. That night, Alan tried to dismiss what he'd seen. Bright Hollow had no place for science fiction mysteries. But through the thin walls of his bedroom, he heard faint pulses, rhythmic, almost musical tones, drifting through the night air from next door. In a town that never changed, something impossible had just moved in, and it was living right beside him. Chapter 2. A Strange Frequency. Alan woke early the next morning, mind still tangled around the odd pulses he'd heard overnight. They had seemed almost patterned, too regular to be a random hum or a faulty appliance. He decided to check his old radio scanner, a hobby from college he'd never quite let go of. Alan set it on his kitchen table and tuned across the bands while sipping lukewarm coffee. At first, the airwaves were the same jumble of static and distant voices as always. But then, as he shifted closer to the window facing Draven's house, a new signal emerged, short, measured tones repeating on a cycle, as if someone were sending a coded message. Alan leaned forward, adjusting the dial until the tones grew stronger. They fell into a tight rhythm, reminding him of Morse code, but too complex and layered to be any human language he recognized. He scribbled down the pattern in a notebook, then replayed it several times, trying to pick out repeats or familiar intervals. Every instinct in him said this was not random. That evening, Alan went out to take his trash to the curb and saw Draven unloading something from the back of a dark SUV. A small metallic case with a brushed surface, no brand name, no stickers, nothing. When Alan waved, Draven looked up, eyes cool and watchful. "Evening," Alan called. Draven nodded but didn't answer, focusing instead on carrying the case through his front door. Alan watched him vanish inside. Seconds later, a faint hum rose from somewhere in the house, like a generator powering up. Alan stood in the driveway a while longer, heart pounding. He tried to reason it away. Maybe it was lab equipment, maybe Draven was just a weird scientist with advanced gear. But the sound on his scanner, the metallic glow he'd glimpsed in the crate the day before, it didn't add up. By the time Alan went back inside, night had settled across Bright Hollow. Alan lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening for the pattern through the walls. Sure enough, just after midnight, the faint coded pulses returned, as steady and precise as before. He switched on his recorder and captured the entire sequence, noting how the pitch occasionally shifted, almost like a conversation. Alan realized he was already too involved. His neighbor was sending or receiving something and nobody else seemed to notice. The next morning, Alan resolved to learn more. Patterns had always been his gift, and this one might reveal a truth bigger than anything he'd ever known. Chapter 3. Through the Fence. Alan spent the next few days trying to act normal while cataloging every scrap of strange data he could collect. He left his recorder running most nights, studying the pulses that seemed to follow a schedule of their own. During the day he jotted down timestamps, sketching diagrams that looked more and more like a language. Yet the signals were just part of the puzzle. Alan needed a closer look. His chance came when a section of their shared wooden fence broke during a thunderstorm. Early the next morning, Alan walked over with a hammer and a box of nails, offering to help. Draven was already outside, standing over the splintered boards with the same unreadable calm as always. Alan forced a smile. "Looks like we had a rough night. I can help patch this up." Draven regarded him for a moment, then nodded. "That would be helpful." Together they worked along the fence line. Alan watched Draven move with a kind of mechanical precision, barely glancing at what he was doing, every nail driven perfectly straight. When Alan asked a few harmless questions, about Draven's supposed research, about whether he liked Bright Hollow so far, Draven offered the shortest answers possible. As they worked, Alan stole quick looks through the gap in the fence into Draven's garage. There, half hidden behind stacks of blank cardboard boxes, stood a tall structure of metallic rods joined by strange filaments that pulsed with a pale blue light. Thin wires wound around it in looping coils, connecting to a panel covered in symbols Alan couldn't place. They looked nothing like English or any language he'd ever studied. Before Alan could get a longer look, Draven shifted, subtly stepping into his line of sight as if he knew Alan was peering inside. Alan's breath caught. Draven spoke in an even tone. "I'll take care of the rest of this side," he said, gesturing Alan toward the other end of the fence. Alan nodded quickly and retreated. He felt the prickling sense of being watched, even as he tried to refocus on hammering nails. By late afternoon they had repaired the fence, and Draven excused himself without a smile, carrying a small device tucked under one arm. Alan caught the faintest flash of blue on its side, then it vanished behind the door. That night, the coded pulses returned through the walls, stronger and clearer than ever. Alan recorded the whole sequence, his mind racing. The pattern seemed to repeat every third cycle, as if repeating a command or a location. He could no longer convince himself that Draven was just a harmless scientist with exotic equipment. Something far bigger was playing out next door, and Alan had to know what it was. Chapter 4: The Impossible Rescue. Alan tried to go about his usual work, but the patterns he had recorded filled every spare moment of his mind. He spent long evenings replaying the coded pulses, certain they held a message he could one day unlock. One night, while he was reviewing another section of the recording, a sound outside caught his attention, a faint mechanical whirring. Alan set his tablet down and stepped onto his back porch. Beyond the fence, near the edge of Draven's backyard, a small drone hovered. Its form was stark and angular, not at all like the toy-grade models Alan sometimes saw around town. This one seemed built for something else. Alan moved closer, trying to stay behind the bushes. The drone made a series of clicking noises, and its lens rotated, scanning the yard with a bright red glow. Then it pivoted and faced him directly. Alan froze. A beam of light swept over him and a thin object, something like a needle, snapped out from its side. Alan's pulse jumped. Before he could duck, a sharp crack split the air. Draven appeared from the shadows, moving so fast Alan barely tracked it. In one powerful stride, Draven shoved him out of the way and raised a thin metallic rod. A blue arc of energy fired from the tip, slamming into the drone. Sparks burst across the lawn, and the machine tumbled to the ground, scorched and smoking. Alan struggled to breathe, staring at the wreckage. Draven stood over it, face lit by a pale blue glow from the device in his hand. "You shouldn't have come outside," Draven said evenly. Alan could barely form the words. What is that thing?" Draven looked at him, eyes steady, no fear in them at all. "A probe," he answered. "Designed to identify me. It would have tagged you too." Alan swallowed hard, chest tight. "Identify you? Who sent it?" Draven scanned the yard, then motioned for Alan to follow. "Come inside. It's no longer safe out here." Alan hesitated, but then followed him through the back door of Draven's house. Inside, Draven set the metal rod down and gestured to a seat. The place smelled faintly of ozone and warm circuitry. Alan took in the surroundings. Wires, coils, screens filled with symbols he couldn't read, and a row of devices that looked built for another world. Draven knelt beside one of the glowing panels, adjusting a dial with precise, almost mechanical movements. "You've seen too much," he said after a moment, his voice low. "I can't leave you unprotected now." Alan forced out a laugh, but it died quickly. "Are you telling me you're, an agent?" "A spy." Draven met his gaze without flinching. "I am not from here," he said plainly. "I was sent to watch for threats. That drone belongs to one of them. Alan's mind went blank. He tried to assemble a logical protest, but the machine outside, the symbols, the impossible blue energy, it all lined up in a terrifying way. So what happens to me now? Alan asked. Draven replied without hesitation. You help me, or you run and they find you anyway. Alan looked back at the broken drone through the window. The choice felt crushing, but in that moment he saw how real the danger was. He turned back to Draven, voice unsteady. What do you need me to do? Chapter 5. The Hidden Truth. Alan sat in Draven's spare chair, staring at equipment that seemed ripped straight from a dream. Panels of metal lined with pulsing lines of blue energy, circular devices that rotated without any visible motor, and symbols that seemed to rearrange themselves depending on how he looked at them. Draven worked calmly, tapping symbols on a panel that responded with a faint chime. They will keep sending probes, he explained. Their priority is to expose me. Alan tried to steady his voice. Who exactly are they? Draven glanced over, eyes unwavering. A rival faction from my sector, he said. They think Earth should be under their control. I was sent to monitor and to stop them if they made a move. Alan gripped the arm of the chair, thoughts churning. You mean there are more of you? Here? Yes, Draven replied. Some who support my mission. Others, who want to seize territory before Earth can defend itself. Alan ran a hand through his hair, mind fighting to accept the words. Why me? Why pull me in? Draven hesitated, studying him as if measuring his answer. Because you saw too much. They know you saw the drone. That makes you a witness and a target. Alan's mouth went dry. You're telling me I can't even go back to my own house? Not without risking another probe, Draven said. I can shield you, but you have to cooperate. Alan looked again at the strange technology surrounding him. A set of small floating discs hovered in midair above a panel, tracking his movement. Another tool on a nearby bench was actively healing a scratch on Draven's wrist, closing the torn skin in seconds. It was impossible to deny. No human built these things. Draven's tone softened slightly. Alan, I need your help. I know how their networks work, but I don't know the human systems. I need someone who can move through them without drawing attention. Alan swallowed hard. You mean, use me as cover? More like an ally, Draven answered. They will expect you to hide or panic. Instead, we use that to plan. Alan considered all of it, the probe, the impossible machines, the alien faction at war on Earth's doorstep. He thought about his quiet street, the half-finished reports waiting in his inbox, the predictable life he had fought so hard to build. But if Draven was telling the truth, there was no going back to normal. Alan finally nodded, though every instinct told him it was a risk. Okay, he said, voice low. I'll help you. Draven gave a single, subtle nod. Good. I will show you what you need to know. Alan felt the weight of that promise as the faint blue lights danced around them, whispering of a secret far bigger than he had ever imagined. Chapter 6. A Dangerous Alliance. Alan returned home briefly to gather a few essentials. Toothbrush, spare clothes, a small toolkit, nothing that would draw suspicion if he had to leave quickly. The street looked the same as always, lined with tidy hedges and porches decorated with summer flowers. It struck him how easily people could live side by side with a war they didn't even know existed. When Alan stepped back into Draven's place, the faint mechanical scent of charged metal hit him again. Draven was bent over one of the panels, making adjustments with a tool that hummed a low note through the air. Alan set his bag down. What exactly do you want me to do first? Draven looked up, measuring him with those steady, focused eyes. Their agents will come, he explained. I cannot move freely in human spaces without being noticed. You can. I need your help to monitor them. Alan nodded, uneasy. So you want me to be your scout? In a way, Draven replied. You know your systems, cameras, networks, movement patterns. I need that. You will notice details that they try to hide. Alan tried to hold on to logic. And if I get caught? Draven answered calmly, then you tell them nothing. Alan shivered but pushed the fear aside. Fine. Where do we start? Draven gestured to a console nearby. Symbols moved across its glassy face, rearranging themselves as if sensing Alan's presence. I have identified 2 possible infiltration points, Draven said. One near the industrial district, another closer to your town center. Alan studied the map. The locations were familiar, a security supply warehouse and an abandoned medical office. Both easy places to hide equipment or come and go unnoticed. I want to check both, Alan said. Draven nodded once. Good. We will go together, but you will speak if we are questioned. They will believe you. Alan laughed faintly. You really think I can sell this? You can, Draven replied, voice calm. You are human. They trust your face. Alan stared at the map again, feeling the weight of what he'd signed up for. He had spent years analyzing safe, predictable data, living behind a keyboard. Now he would be scanning for alien infiltrators alongside someone who barely qualified as human. A sudden mechanical tone pulsed through the room. Draven turned toward another device, this one shaped like a shallow bowl, pulsing gently with blue rings. They are moving, he said. We go tonight. Alan swallowed, shoulders tensing. Then I guess I'm in. Draven gave him a single subtle nod, then reached for a dark gray jacket that hung from a hook. Alan caught a glimpse of the strange band around Draven's wrist, small symbols glowing in perfect rows across it. Whatever lay ahead, Alan knew he was stepping across a line he could never uncross. But it was too late to turn away now. Chapter 7. Enemy on the Move. Night had settled over Bright Hollow, the streetlights painting long shadows over cracked sidewalks and quiet driveways. Alan followed Draven through the neighborhood, trying to act as normal as possible. A bag slung over his shoulder held a pair of wireless cameras, a portable radio scanner, and the notebook full of coded patterns he'd been recording. Draven barely made a sound as he moved, steps measured and silent. His eyes scanned every corner, every parked car, as if reading the slightest movements for threats. They reached the first target, the security supply warehouse on the edge of town. The place looked abandoned after hours, but Alan knew the building was still wired for alarms and cameras. Draven glanced at him. They will have watchers here. They prefer vantage points, rooftops, higher ground. Alan nodded, breathing carefully, and guided them around to a side fence where a panel of chain link had come loose. They stepped through, then crept along the loading dock. Inside the warehouse, a faint orange glow spilled through dirty windows. Alan slipped closer, peering through a broken pane. Two figures in dark coveralls moved around equipment crates. They were handling something Alan couldn't fully see, a console with soft green lights that looked far beyond anything he'd ever seen on Earth. Draven leaned next to him, voice barely above a whisper. Agents. They use human disguises, but their eyes will give them away. Alan squinted, heart thumping, trying to spot what Draven meant. After a moment, one of the men turned toward the window and Alan saw it. A flat, glassy gaze that didn't look human at all, pupils too bright and reflecting every sliver of light. Draven's hand rested on Alan's arm. We disable their relay, he said. They will scatter without it. Alan nodded, then gestured toward the side exit. There's a service door. It should be unalarmed if they haven't rewired it. Draven's faint nod was the only reply. Together they slipped around the building and reached the door. Alan picked the lock, grateful for an old hobby that suddenly felt far too relevant, and eased it open. Inside, the air was stale with old dust and machine oil. Draven led the way, moving with a practiced confidence Alan could only follow. They approached the crate where the console sat, its symbols shifting across the screen. Alan asked softly, Can I touch it? No, Draven said flatly. I will handle it. Draven produced a small black disc from his coat and pressed it to the console. The console flickered, lights dying, symbols freezing on their surface. One of the disguised agents whipped around, eyes flaring with that unearthly shine, and shouted in a language Alan couldn't place. Draven stepped forward, calm as stone, raising his hand. A quick arc of blue energy snapped from a ring on his finger, striking the agent square in the chest. The man fell, twitching, then went still. The second agent bolted for the door, but Alan reached for the console's power leads and yanked them free. Sparks danced along the concrete floor, and the relay unit went dark. The agent gave Alan one last sharp look, then sprinted away into the night. Alan braced against the crate, trying to slow his breathing. Draven approached and nodded once. Well done, he said. Alan forced a weak grin. I'm not sure that's what I'd call it. Draven placed a steady hand on his shoulder. We must move. They will regroup. Alan knew he was in far deeper than he'd ever imagined, but as they stepped out into the shadows once more, a small, unexpected sense of purpose burned through him. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. Alan and Draven moved quickly through narrow alleys behind the warehouse district. The night felt sharper after what they'd seen. No police sirens, no witnesses, just an unsettling quiet. They reached the abandoned medical office by dawn. The windows were covered with plywood, the parking lot cracked and littered with weeds. It looked deserted, but Alan could see faint footprints in the dust where the emergency exit had been forced open. Draven lowered his voice. They are inside. Alan gripped the scanner in his pocket. How many? Draven paused, eyes distant, as though listening to a frequency Alan couldn't hear. 2. Alan swallowed, then nodded. They stepped through the side door, careful not to disturb the board still leaning against the frame. The building smelled of mold and stale chemicals, and the echo of their footsteps seemed impossibly loud. Near the old nurse's station, Alan spotted them. 2 figures in ragged coats, hunched over a portable relay device set on a broken countertop. They turned as one, eyes catching the light with that same glassy shine Alan remembered. One of them spoke, the language harsh and clipped. Draven answered in the same alien tongue, his voice steady. Alan couldn't follow their words, but the tone was clear. A warning. Then everything exploded into movement. One of the agents lunged, a blade snapping from his sleeve. Draven reacted instantly, blocking the strike with his forearm and spinning the attacker across the floor. Alan ducked, adrenaline flooding him as the second agent advanced. Alan raised the scanner, his only weapon, and slammed it against the side of the console. Sparks leapt from the casing, frying the circuits, and the device went dark. The second agent screamed in frustration and lunged at Alan, but Draven intercepted, driving a punch into the creature's ribs. The agent staggered, unbalanced, and Draven finished it with a swift strike to the throat. Alan steadied himself against the wall, breathing hard. Draven wiped blood from his knuckles. They are finished, he said. Alan's voice shook. Is it over? Draven met his gaze. No. These were scouts. The true command force will come next. Alan felt the weight of that hit him. And we're the only line of defense? Draven nodded once. Yes. Alan looked around the ruined office. Shattered computers, broken chairs, a cracked tile floor that might once have seen people healed. Now it was a battlefield as silent as a grave. He let out a long, shaky breath. Then tell me what to do next. Draven placed a steady hand on his shoulder. We prepare. The morning light was breaking through gaps in the plywood as they stepped outside, casting long beams across the ground. Alan turned back once, looking at the burned-out relay. The enemy knew they were here. And soon the real fight would begin. Chapter 9, The Ultimate Choice. Alan stood on the sidewalk outside Draven's house, eyes scanning the empty street. It was hard to believe this quiet neighborhood was the front line of a hidden war. Kids rode bicycles, sprinklers ran in neat yards, and mail carriers did their rounds, all unaware that an alien conflict was about to break through their routines. Draven emerged from the garage, carrying a metal case marked with symbols that shifted like flowing water. Alan had stopped trying to understand their script, accepting instead that it was never meant for human eyes. Draven set the case down and spoke in a steady voice. They will land a retrieval craft by tomorrow. Their scouts failed, but they will send soldiers next. Alan tried to keep his voice level. Can your people stop them? Draven looked at him directly. I cannot reach my command in time. We are on our own. Alan swallowed. So what does that mean for me? Draven studied him with the same calm precision Alan had come to recognize. You have seen the risk. You know they will kill to protect their mission. You must decide, return to your life, let them erase you, or stay with me and fight. Alan's heart felt like it might crack under the weight of that. He tried to picture his old life, spreadsheets, grocery runs, quiet weekends. That world had already slipped through his fingers. He took a slow breath. If I leave, they'll find me eventually, won't they? Draven did not hesitate. Yes. Alan ran a hand over his jaw, staring at the grass where his sprinklers would come on later that evening. This house, his ordinary life, had become a memory already. He lifted his gaze to Draven. Then I'm in. Draven gave a faint nod. Good. I have a defense array ready, but I will need your help to place it. Alan shouldered his pack. Where? The school on the hill, Draven replied. Its power grid can sustain the shield for a short time. Alan felt a stab of dread at the thought of children near a battlefield, but Draven seemed to read his concern. They will be evacuated, Draven promised. I will trigger a fire alarm to clear them. Alan nodded, the final threads of his old routine snapping for good. Let's move. Together they loaded the strange case into Alan's car. As he drove toward the school, he watched Draven adjust a band around his wrist, blue pulses flickering along its surface. It hit Alan then with a quiet certainty. He had stepped so far outside a normal life, there was no return. And tomorrow, whatever these soldiers brought with them, he would stand beside Draven and face it. Chapter 10, A New Frontier. Alan helped Draven unload the metal case at the back of the school. The morning sun was just cresting the ridge, throwing pale gold across the asphalt. Teachers and staff were already guiding children out of the building as the alarms blared, none of them realizing how close they'd come to becoming hostages in someone else's war. Draven positioned the case on a concrete pad near the generator shed. With a soft hiss, it opened to reveal an array of coils and plates that vibrated with a low current. Alan could feel the hairs on his arms rise from the field it generated. Draven spoke calmly. This will stabilize a defensive barrier. It cannot hold forever, but it may repel their scouts and shield the building. Alan nodded, trying to keep his mind clear. And what about the soldiers coming down? Draven met his eyes. We stand in their way. Alan exhaled, steadying himself. Then let's do it. Draven handed him a smaller device, a curved rod with a trigger and a series of shifting symbols. This will disrupt their armor for a few seconds, he explained. Use it if they break through. Alan took it with a tense nod, the metal warm in his grip. Moments later, a low rumble rolled through the sky, growing stronger. Alan looked up, spotting a triangular craft slicing through the blue, its surface flickering like heat on pavement. The craft circled once, then lowered toward the playground. Draven stood motionless, eyes locked on the ship. Stay close, he ordered. The craft set down with a heavy thud, and a ramp extended to the blacktop. 3 figures emerged, taller than the scouts, with broad frames and an unnatural stillness to their movements. Their armor looked like hammered steel, broken only by lines of dim green light that crawled along their shoulders and arms. One of them spoke in that harsh alien tongue. Draven answered, voice measured but fierce. Alan didn't catch the words, but he saw the moment the standoff broke. The lead soldier lunged forward, and Draven met him in a collision that sounded like iron striking stone. Sparks flew as they grappled, Draven's wristband flaring with blue pulses. Alan turned, spotting another soldier moving for the generator. He raised the curved rod, pressed the trigger, and felt a jolt rush through his bones. A pulse slammed into the soldier, sending him crashing into the playground slide. A third attacker advanced on Alan, blade snapping from its wrist. Alan scrambled sideways, heart pounding, until Draven intercepted, spinning the soldier away in a burst of raw force. The fight raged for what felt like an hour, though Alan knew it was only minutes. Finally, the triangular ship's lights dimmed, and the soldiers fell back, retreating up the ramp as smoke poured from their armor. Alan collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Draven stepped over, steady as ever, and offered a hand to pull him up. They will not risk another wave, Draven said. Not today. Alan swallowed, blinking up at the morning sky. What happens now? Draven looked toward the town, where sirens were just starting to echo in the distance. We clean up, he said. Then we decide how to guard this world. Alan followed Draven's gaze. The quiet homes, the baseball fields, the line of yellow buses, all suddenly felt different, like a place he would protect instead of just pass through. Whatever tomorrow brought, Alan knew one truth. His neighbor had once been a mystery. Now together they had become something more, a shield.